The Magic overcame the first hurdle, becoming the first team to ever come back from a 3-2 deficit against the Boston Celtics. But now can they become the first team in this postseason to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in any game? Hey, how are you folks? Jason Horowitz. Glad to be with you here on CBSSports.com. Eastern Conference Finals preview, Orlando, Cleveland. Let's bring in our CBSSports.com NBA columnist Ken Berger to break it down. And Ken, obviously the Magic coming off that grueling, emotionally and physically 7-game series. Cleveland hasn't had a grueling game yet this postseason. All 8 victories by double digits, have not lost yet. How much of a role does that play in this part of the series?
You know, I think it could play a role in Game 1 or in the early parts of the series, but I think as you get into the teeth of the series, those kind of factors will kind of work themselves out. I mean, I think if you look at Cleveland, they haven't been challenged at all. They've been off. You know, they've been practicing, but that's not the same thing as being in a game. And Orlando is going to be really sharp. So I think that may be something that shows up in Game 1. But remember, Game 1 is on Cleveland's floor, and they don't lose there. So I think that will allow them to kind of overcome any of that.
Yeah, the 2 losses they had to Orlando during the regular season were both in the state of Florida. Ken, let's talk about this, though. Something that Cleveland has not seen in this postseason is an interior presence. In all postseason, we've talked about how aggressive Dwight Howard has to be, but when you look at the defenders he's going to see, Big Z and Varejao and Ben Wallace, Joe Smith off the bench, is that enough to make him use everybody else?
Well, I think that's where Cleveland has an advantage over Boston, and that was the problem that the Celtics had, is that they just didn't have enough depth to deal with all the fouls they were going to incur and having to defend Howard. You know, the Cavs do have depth, and they're going to be able to spread the fouls around. But where the post presence really makes a difference, in my opinion, here is you know, LeBron has been able to drive to the basket with abandon in the first 2 rounds. He really has not had anyone to keep him out of the paint. And you know, when if he breaks down Orlando's defense and gets past, you know, Michael Petrus or Courtney Lee or whoever they're defending him, you know, Dwight Howard's going to be standing there, and he hasn't been there in the first 2 rounds.
That is a big part of this, but Ken, he did have 47 in the win that they had against Orlando in the early part of the year. But as you've pointed out to me before, in the other 2 games, he struggled against Orlando. How do they make him play like that versus a 47-point game?
Well, you can't hope. I mean, if you're Orlando, you have to hope that you know, the 47-point game, if that's going to happen in this series, maybe it only happens once. And the rest of the time, you hope you're able to keep him at bay. Like, you know, in the first game in January, he was 10 for 27. And in the last regular season game in April, 7 for 20. You know, they don't have one guy. Nobody has one guy who can stop him or keep him out of the paint. And you have to hope that you turn him into a jump shooter and he misses, you know, the bulk of them. But you know, they do have a very underrated team defensive concept in Orlando. Nobody's given them any credit for the way they defend, and they really showed in the way that they put the wraps on Ray Allen and Paul Pierce in the Boston series that, you know, the kind of defensive team they are.
They also showed in Game 7, Ken, though, that supporting cast around Dwight Howard, how good it really is and how important a guy like Hedo Turkoglu is. You put him and Rashard Lewis together in this series. Do they provide mismatches against Cleveland?
Well, they do, to the extent that Rashard Lewis is going to be a guy who's going to live up to his $118 million contract, and that's been hanging over him for ever since he signed it. He's a very nice player, but you know Howard is going to get his. He's going to get his with putbacks and offensive rebounds, and they do a very good job of getting him the ball on the move. Turkoglu is a really versatile offensive player, and they'll probably put LeBron on him for long stretches to kind of keep him from getting on a roll. But the key guy is Rashard Lewis. We know he hits the 3, but where he becomes even more dangerous is if he drives to the basket. And he only did that on occasion in the Boston series. I think he's going to have to be a lot more aggressive against the Cavs.
What about Cleveland? Who is the X factor not named LeBron James?
You know, I think it could be Delonte West. I mean, he's a guy who, you know, he only played 2 of the 3 games against Orlando and averaged 6.5 a game in the regular season. That's half his season average. So Cleveland would like to get some more out of him. And I would look to their bench because they really didn't need to get anything at all out of their role players. Wally Zerbiak, Sasha Pavlovich, Daniel Gibson, who was a big star in past playoffs for them. They didn't need to get anything out of those guys, and I think in this series, I think it's going to go, you know, 6 or 7 games. They're going to need to get not big numbers, but you know, timely baskets from one or a couple of those guys.
All right, Ken, you think it's going to go 6 or 7, but who wins it ultimately?
I think Cleveland will survive here. I just think as underrated as Orlando is defensively, and they really are, I just don't think they have the firepower to win this series. Even though they've overcome this huge hurdle and coming back from down 3-2 against the Celtics. I think Cleveland will win a very hard-fought series. It'll be the toughest test by far for them this year, which isn't saying much, but I'm going to take the Cavs in 6.
All right, Ken Berger, thank you very much, sir. We'll enjoy reading all your stuff about it throughout the Eastern Conference Finals. Talk to you soon, bud.
All right, Jason.
All right, folks, for more on the Eastern Conference Finals or to get a video preview of the Western Conference Finals between the Nuggets and the Lakers, be sure to stay with CBSSports.com. For Ken Berger, I'm Jason Horowitz. Take care, folks.